How well do you think you know someone? When you're thousands of miles away, would you still trust their smile, their voice, their promises, if all you had was a screen, a poor connection, and a handful of texts? I used to believe loyalty ran in our blood, that being a soldier meant something deeper than just the uniform. It meant honor, trust, duty, not just to your country, but to the people waiting for you at home. My name is Cale Riven. I'm a special reconnaissance operative, and I was stationed overseas for 7 months on a covert deployment. No contact except encrypted dispatches, no FaceTime, no birthdays, no anniversaries. But I held on, because I had someone worth coming back to. Her name was Celeste, my wife, my supposed anchor through every firestorm and night op I pushed through. She worked in admin back at the base, coordinating internal logistics. Smart, calm under pressure, and stunning in that simple, effortless way. We got married just before my second deployment, and when I left, she kissed me with trembling hands and told me to come back in one piece. So I did. I came back whole. But I wasn't coming back to a whole life. The first red flag wasn't a scream. It was silence. The kind of silence that stretches just a second too long when you ask, "Hey babe, how was your day?" Her voice didn't light up anymore. She said she was tired every day. I chalked it up to stress, work, loneliness. Hell, I knew long distance was brutal. But the second red flag, that came from someone who owed me nothing but gave me everything. A younger private from Signals handed me a flash drive and said, "You didn't hear it from me, but I thought you should know." It had surveillance logs, audio files, internal base footage. At first, I told myself it was a misunderstanding, a coincidence, a bad angle. But the footage didn't lie. I saw Celeste, I saw Ryan Vega, I saw the way they looked at each other, the way she laughed like she hadn't laughed with me in years. I saw them slip away from security zones into dead corners of the base, again and again. But I didn't rage, I didn't throw things, I didn't confront her, I went quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I needed to be precise. So I made a plan. Not just to expose them, but to do it in front of every damn person who thought I was the fool. In front of the same system I bled for. The same community that whispered behind my back when I wasn't even home to defend myself. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about justice. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever had to smile while your world burned quietly behind your eyes, then hear me out, because what I did next, no one saw it coming. Before the betrayal, before the silence, before the sleepless nights wondering why, there was us. Just us. Celeste and I weren't a whirlwind romance. Ours was quieter, gradual, like a slow flame that kept burning no matter the storms. We met during a routine base orientation. I was instructing new recruits on reconnaissance protocol, and she was there to log personnel data. She had this air of quiet efficiency, all crisp button-ups and neatly tied buns, but when she smiled, it was like the world tilted just a bit. We started with coffee breaks, then lunches, then those late-night drives off base when the desert cooled just enough to breathe. When I deployed the first time, we weren't even officially dating, but when I came back, she was the first person I looked for, and the one who waited. The second deployment came quicker than expected. I had just made staff sergeant, and with that came longer tours, classified ops, less contact. We both knew what it meant. Longer silences, delayed letters, and missed birthdays. But Celeste never flinched. She told me she admired my discipline, that she knew what she signed up for, that she could handle distance if it meant being with me. So I believed her. When I proposed, it wasn't in some grand gesture. I handed her a ring box on a Tuesday night while we ate takeout in my truck. She didn't cry. She just grinned, took the ring, and said, "Took you long enough." We married in a tiny courthouse with no guests and no flowers, just a couple of uniforms and 2 vows whispered through tired smiles. She said she didn't want fanfare. I thought it was because she didn't need it. Turns out, maybe she just didn't want it with me. Our apartment near the base was modest, clean, lived in. She liked scented candles and podcasts. I liked maps and mission logs. We coexisted in this strange blend of civilian meets military. She handled the groceries and the bills, and I made sure nothing ever fell through the cracks. Except, eventually, something did. I noticed it before I left for my third deployment. Little things. She'd flinch when I touched her shoulder unexpectedly. She'd turn her phone face down more often. She was more critical too, snapping at dishes left in the sink or the fact that I folded laundry wrong. I figured it was stress. She'd just been moved to the operations support office, a high-volume admin sector where everything ran on deadlines and chain of command chaos. I remember one night I found her in the living room at 2 a.m., scrolling through her phone with this vacant look on her face. I asked if everything was okay. She said, "You'll be gone for 6 months. That's almost half a year. Do you even know how long that feels?" I kissed her forehead and told her we'd be fine. I wish I'd asked more questions. Deployment always changes you, the dust, the discipline, the danger. It wears on the body and the soul, but knowing someone's waiting for you back home, that's the tether, the anchor. That's what made the difference between coming back alive or just coming back. And for the first few months, that illusion held. Celeste wrote to me every week, short emails, no calls since our mission protocol was dark. But she'd send photos of our cat, her at the gym, even dumb memes she thought I'd laugh at. She signed off with, "Counting the days." But sometime around month 4, the messages changed. They got shorter, less detail, fewer photos. Then they stopped altogether. I sent 3 emails. No reply. When I finally accessed a base-approved line and called her, she answered on the 3rd ring, breathless, said she was in the middle of a training seminar and would call me back. She didn't. I tried not to spiral. I told myself she was overwhelmed, that admin positions weren't as simple as people thought, but my gut told me something was wrong. Then I heard Orion Vega's name. He was a name I'd heard before, a logistics coordinator, fit, charismatic. Ex-Marine turned civilian contractor. I'd seen him once or twice, always surrounded by people, always flashing that grin like he owned every room. He was working the same office Celeste had just transferred to. I asked one of my buddies on base, someone still stateside, if he'd seen them around. He said, "They're pretty tight, always grabbing lunch together." My stomach dropped. Still, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I convinced myself she needed a friend, someone to vent to about work and stress. I mean, it's not like I could be there, not from halfway across the world, but I started noticing patterns. Every time I managed a brief call, she was distracted. Every time I asked how her day was, she said, "Same old, nothing to tell." And yet, I knew something was happening, something she wouldn't tell me, so I began documenting. I wrote down every conversation, every delay in response, every inconsistency. I wasn't sure what I was building, some kind of internal timeline, a case file, paranoia, but it made me feel sane. Then finally, the day came. Deployment wrapped, mission complete. I flew home, jet-lagged and worn thin, but desperate to see her. And when I walked into our apartment, she wasn't there. Not the way she used to be. Not the way I remembered. There were unfamiliar colognes in the bathroom. A mug that wasn't mine in the sink, and a man's sweatshirt, not mine, folded neatly on the couch. That was the first moment I felt it, not suspicion, but certainty. And just like that, the countdown to retribution began. It started with silence, the kind that stretches too long after a question, the kind that fills a room more completely than noise ever could. I just returned from a trip, 3 weeks in Tokyo, negotiating a joint venture deal. We usually celebrated those moments. Celine would be waiting at the door, barefoot, holding a glass of wine, pretending she wasn't counting the hours. But that night, the lights were on, the music low, and she was sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop, barely looking up when I came in. "Hey," she said, her eyes skimming the screen, "you're back." No rush into my arms, no kiss, no warmth. That night, as I unpacked in silence, a single thought rooted itself in my chest. Something had shifted. I told myself I was being paranoid, jet lag, stress, the aftermath of a high-stakes deal. But paranoia, I've learned, is sometimes just instinct denied its voice. The first real crack came 3 days later. I found a receipt in the dryer, dry cleaning, under her name, from a place miles from where we lived. She never used that place. I only noticed it because I'd done the laundry to surprise her. When I asked, casually, she shrugged it off. "Oh, I was meeting a client across town, just convenient." Maybe that would have satisfied me if it weren't for how her voice rose half a pitch too high. Then came the missed calls, the locked phone, the half laughs she made while texting. I began to notice patterns. She'd started going to work earlier, coming home later. She had meetings, she said, pressing deadlines. An agency pitch that couldn't wait, but I owned the company, and I hadn't approved any new pitches. When I gently asked about it, she froze for a split second, long enough for me to register it. Then she smiled. It's with a smaller client, not on your radar. Internal team stuff. Internal team stuff. That phrase clanged in my skull like a warning bell. So I started digging. Not openly. I wasn't ready to confront her. I needed certainty, proof, something undeniable. I reviewed her calendar. Nothing unusual. But the entries were vague. Meeting, strategy sync, client brainstorm. Nothing that raised alarm unless you were looking for what was missing. Then I checked our shared credit card statement. Charges from a bistro downtown she swore she hated, a hotel bar near our office, 2 movie tickets for a Thursday afternoon. That was the moment I felt something inside me crack, not from pain, but from clarity. I wasn't paranoid, I wasn't insecure. Something was happening, something real, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. I didn't go to the police. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't scream or accuse. I observed. Celine had always been careful, borderline obsessive about details, but even the most careful people make mistakes when they believe no one is watching. I started coming into the office unannounced. I'd show up midday with coffee, pretending to check in on her team. The first time she smiled, stiff and unsure. The second time, she looked annoyed. By the third, she was just cold. Once I passed by the creative wing and saw her leaning over someone's desk, her hand on his shoulder, laughing, whispering. I only saw the back of his head, dark hair, slim build. I couldn't place him. I stayed out of sight, watched from the glass reflection. Later, I pulled the employee directory. Only 2 new hires matched the profile. One name stood out, Reed Callahan. Freelance creative, brought in for a short-term contract, and his schedule aligned a little too perfectly with Celine's. So I started asking around. Nothing obvious, just subtle questions with her assistant, team members. How's Reed working out? Celine's spending a lot of time with the freelancers these days. I watched their faces more than I listened to their answers. There was a hesitation, a glance away, a tightening of the mouth. One of the junior designers, a kid named Emma, finally cracked. They're close, she said quietly. Like, really close. I'm not trying to gossip, but it's been weird. Weird. It's such a small word for betrayal. I left work early that day, sat in my car for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared out at the city and realized something I never wanted to admit. She wasn't mine anymore, but I wasn't going to lose everything. Not my dignity, not my company, not the narrative. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Rowan Hale, a venture capitalist, ex-business partner, and ironically, the last person Celine ever wanted near me. He picked up on the first ring. Kyle, he said, voice as calm and calculated as I remembered. It's been a while. What do you need? I need a partner, I replied, and a stage. There was a pause. Is this about her? He asked. Yes. Then let's give her the performance of a lifetime. The idea started small, a conversation, a hypothetical. But with Rowan, hypotheticals never stayed that way for long. He had always been 3 moves ahead of everyone. That's why I called him. We met in a quiet restaurant downtown, one of those places where the waiters knew to leave you alone and the lighting was too dim to see betrayal coming. I laid out everything I knew, the timelines, the late nights, the lies. Rowan listened, sipping whiskey like he was at a board meeting instead of a war council. You want to hurt her, he said when I finished, or you want to win? I didn't answer right away because there was a difference. One was emotional, the other was strategic. I want her to understand what she destroyed, I finally said, and I want her to feel it not just for a day, for years. Oh, Rowan smiled. Then let's build her dream. At first, the plan felt like a fantasy, too cruel, too intricate, but as we shaped it, it became something else. A mirror, a way to reflect Selena's ambition and duplicity back at her, not just to punish, but to reveal. I would become everything she ever wanted. I started pulling back emotionally, just enough to make her feel the shift. Not so much she'd grow suspicious, but enough that she'd notice the vacuum. Then I began to praise Reed in meetings, subtly, promoting his ideas, including him in more projects. Celine took the bait, defending him, supporting him publicly. I documented everything, not in words, but in action. Her professional endorsements, her scheduling choices, her lack of boundaries. Meanwhile, Rowan re-entered our orbit, and smooth, charismatic, just dangerous enough to unsettle her. She didn't know what to make of it. "Why is he around again?" she asked me one night after a networking event. "We're discussing new investments," I said. "He's interested in a merger." And he was, just not the kind she imagined. In the weeks that followed, Rowan and I refined every step. We mapped her behaviors. We gathered silent allies, people who had also seen the signs but had remained quiet. Once they realized someone was finally paying attention, they started talking. I learned about a weekend retreat she said was company-sponsored. It wasn't. I learned Reed had once visited her apartment when I was out of town. I found emails that weren't romantic but far too personal. Lines that crossed, that blurred. Each discovery wasn't a shock. It was a confirmation. The gut instinct I had ignored for months now screamed in every detail. And yet, I said nothing to her. I let her believe I was still blind because the best revenge doesn't strike fast. It waits, it watches, and when it comes, it's not a slap. It's a mirror. She would see herself in mine. Soon. I didn't sleep the night after Rowan and I finalized the plan. It wasn't fear, it was focus. That kind of clarity only comes when you stop denying what you already know. And now that I had accepted what Celine had done, what she was, my mind worked like a machine. Everything she had ever said or done started rearranging itself into patterns. Her apologies, her late-night meetings, the way she changed her passwords without mentioning it. It all made sense now. I wasn't just betrayed, I had been groomed not to notice, and that made me dangerous. The first step of any investigation is to stop asking questions out loud. I became quiet, observant. I took notes, not of what she did, but what she didn't. When she failed to mention a lunch meeting that showed up on her calendar, when she skipped a call and claimed it was rescheduled, even though the client confirmed otherwise, I began building timelines, syncing her public excuses with private movements. I installed a secondary tracker on our shared calendar, not to spy, but to verify. Every lie creates a gap, and she was leaving gaps like cracks in pavement. Meanwhile, Rowan handled the external. He reached out to a friend of his in cybersecurity, a woman named Cass. Cass didn't ask questions. She simply rerouted email logs, checked IP addresses, and confirmed what we already suspected. Celine had a burner email, registered under a fake name, but stupidly tied to a phone number she'd once used on a car rental form. Rookie mistake. Through that account, we gained access to a whole archive of messages. Some were mundane, work gossip, private memes, but a few were red flags wrapped in emojis, like one from Reed that said, "If he finds out, we blame stress. Just say we drifted." Or worse, "You said he'd never question you. I need you to keep him distracted. Keep him distracted." I stared at that line for hours, not because it hurt, but because it was a strategy. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was a coordinated effort to keep me blind while they consolidated whatever power they thought they had. Cass pulled metadata, traced locations. Reed had visited our apartment building twice while I was out of state, and he had parked 2 blocks away and walked in. No visitor log, no cameras, but the timestamps matched her supposed solo wine nights. And still, I said nothing. Because silence was leverage. While Cass and Rowan dug deep into their tech rabbit hole, I played my role. The loyal partner, the distracted CEO. I even planned a weekend trip to reconnect, a fake romantic getaway that I never intended to take. I just wanted to see her reaction. She hesitated. For a full second, she paused and looked away before smiling and saying, "That sounds amazing." One heartbeat of panic. It told me everything I needed to know. The hesitation was all the proof I needed. From that point forward, I treated every word Celine spoke as a potential piece of evidence. I started recording audio during our conversations, not because I wanted to use it in court, but because I wanted to study her, her tones, her shifts, her tells, and what I found was horrifying. Celine had perfected the art of omission. She didn't lie blatantly. She guided conversations like a conductor, always steering me away from anything that might reveal the truth. She'd touch my arm, smile sadly, and say things like, "You've been so stressed lately, maybe we should just relax this weekend." Translation: don't ask questions. Cass discovered that Selene had recently booked a hotel suite using a company card from a third-party marketing firm, one Reed was consulting for. She'd never mentioned this hotel stay. In fact, that weekend she told me she was visiting her sister. Rowan traced the payment. I traced the lie. We found CCTV footage from the hotel lobby. It was grainy, but it didn't need to be 4K to be damning. Selene, Reed, holding hands, checking in under Mr. and Mrs. Hayward, a name neither of them owned. I remember watching that video in silence. Rowan had expected me to be furious. Cass braced herself for some reaction, but all I did was breathe, deep, controlled, cold. Because when you're this far down the tunnel, rage is a distraction. What I needed was control, strategy, timing. I spent the next 2 weeks laying foundations. I moved a percentage of our shared assets into a secure trust. I signed off on a team reshuffling plan at our company that subtly began phasing Selene out of decision-making channels. I created distance, but did it lovingly, carefully, always with a smile. Then came the moment I knew would crack it wide open. Cass managed to clone the phone Reed used. With it, we intercepted a scheduled video call. Reed had planned to speak with Selene one evening while she was out buying groceries. Instead, I sat in my study and watched the feed. He was in bed, shirtless, drunk, smirking. "Hey, babe," he said, voice low. "Miss you already." Did he suspect anything after the hotel? I didn't say a word. He blinked, confused. "Selene?" I held the phone up to the camera, showing him my face. His smirk vanished. I ended the call. That night, I didn't confront her. I kissed her goodnight, told her I was proud of how hard she was working, let her fall asleep, curled next to me, blissfully unaware. The next morning, I called my legal team. They would help me build the final stage of this war. And Selene, she'd keep playing her part in the theater of lies until opening night. Selene began to notice the changes, though she never said it out loud. She'd find me working late more often. She'd catch me staring at her a second too long. She'd ask if everything was okay, and I'd respond with a soft smile and an affectionate "of course." That was the worst part for her, I think. The calmness, the patience. It made her feel like she was the one slipping, because in truth, I was no longer reacting, I was observing. With Cass and Rowan's help, I compiled a timeline of every lie Selene had told over the past 6 months. Every dinner date disguised as late meetings, every gift she claimed came from a client, every business trip that overlapped too perfectly with Reed's travel schedule. I even found the private folder she had on her laptop, buried under 3 layers of encryption. It was Cass who cracked it. Inside were screenshots of texts, photos, even a half-finished resignation letter addressed to me. In it, she said she hoped we could part amicably, that she had found someone who understood her better, made her feel seen. The irony was brutal. I printed the letter. I filed it in a folder labeled Truth. Then I kept digging. The deeper we went, the more twisted it became. Reed had not only seduced my wife, he had been siphoning client leads from our company into a shell agency he was building on the side. Selene was helping him. She wasn't just cheating on me emotionally or physically, she was aiding corporate theft. Cass discovered emails, fake invoices, non-compete violations. Rowan even found a registered LLC tied to one of Reed's family members, funneling contracts we should have won. That's when the plan shifted. This wasn't just personal anymore. I started preparing for a full takeover, not just of our relationship, but of every professional advantage Reed thought he was building. I worked with our board. I began stacking evidence, forming alliances, and freezing access. And all the while, Selene still smiled at me across the dinner table, oblivious. I'd learned something terrifying in all this. Betrayal doesn't always wear a villain's mask. Sometimes, it looks like the person you kiss goodnight, the person who whispers, "I love you," while planning your collapse. But I wasn't going to break. I wasn't even going to yell. No, I was going to let her live in the illusion. Until the day I flipped the lights on and made her look at everything she destroyed. It was almost time. The guest list was ready. The venue was booked, because if Selene wanted a beautiful ending to our story, I'd give her a celebration she'd never forget. The day of the ceremony arrived like any other. Blue skies, military flags fluttering, and the base unusually polished for the high-ranking brass in attendance. Celine had spent the entire morning fussing over my uniform, straightening medals, perfecting every crease, oblivious to what was coming. I'd always imagined that if I ever exposed her, it would be dramatic. Maybe a shouting match, maybe her crying, denying, begging. But the truth is, real revenge doesn't need this. It only needs timing. And today, every second was calculated. The promotion ceremony was held in the central hall, reserved for officers receiving special recognition. Guests were seated in rows, lined in perfect symmetry, rows of polished boots and pressed collars. My commanding officer, General Horst, gave the opening remarks. I barely heard them. All I saw was Celine's proud face beaming from the second row. Next to her, Reed, in uniform. The audacity of that bastard to show up, acting like my brother-in-arms, when the only thing he'd covered for me was my wife. He smirked like a man untouched, unaware that he was standing on a landmine. The plan wasn't to confront them in private. No, cowards deserve the light. As I stepped forward to receive the commendation, the AV tech I'd spoken to earlier nodded. On cue, the projector behind me flickered to life. It began innocently. Photos of missions, team camaraderie, heroic footage. People clapped, proud. Then slowly, the images began to change. A blurry security cam still, Celine entering Reed's quarters late at night. Another, her hand brushing his arm in the canteen when they thought no one saw. Then screenshots, messages, voicemails, her voice whispering things no married woman should say to another man. Laughter, moans. A gasp rippled through the room. I turned. Celine was frozen. Reed had gone pale. General Horst stiffened. What the hell is this? I didn't flinch. That, I said clearly, is why I no longer trust the man standing beside my wife, and why I will be submitting formal charges for conduct unbecoming an officer and for theft of military intelligence, which I have proof was exchanged over unsecured devices. Now the room was deathly quiet. Celine stood. Kyle, please, this isn't the place, isn't it? I looked directly at her. You thought the base was a place to lie, to sneak around, to betray. Why shouldn't it be the place where truth is finally shown? Celine's face contorted with shame and disbelief. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She looked around, first at Reed, who had suddenly discovered an intense interest in the floor tiles, then at the officers around her, many of whom were already murmuring and frowning in disapproval. The image behind me was frozen now, a still of her kissing Reed at the back of the barracks, time-stamped and tagged. I didn't want it to come to this, I continued, but I've been lied to, disrespected, and humiliated behind closed doors long enough. I served overseas for this country, trusted the people closest to me to hold the line at home, and they didn't. Reed finally found his voice. Kyle, this is insane. This is between us. You can't just... I turned on him. This was never just between us. You wore the same uniform. You stood beside me during deployments. You toasted at my wedding. You betrayed not just me, but the code. You don't deserve that uniform. Reed's fists clenched, but he didn't dare move. General Horst stepped forward now, cutting through the silence. Sergeant Riven, are you formally accusing Sergeant First Class Reed of misconduct? I am, sir, I said, and I've submitted a full report to Internal Affairs, including evidence of encrypted communication sent from base systems. A collective inhale echoed. That changed everything. Cheating was scandalous, but sending sensitive files over unsecured lines, that was criminal. Celine's voice cracked. I didn't know. He told me it was just personal, nothing official. I looked her in the eye, and for a moment I almost pitied her. Almost. You didn't care to know. That's worse. She took a shaky step forward. Kyle, you have every right to hate me, but do you really want our lives destroyed in front of everyone? I breathed in slowly. You already destroyed them. I'm just turning on the lights. The moment stretched. Then Horst gave a grim nod. Escort Sergeant Reed to holding. I'll inform the JAG office. 2 MPs moved forward and took Reed by the arms. He didn't resist, but the fury in his eyes was unmistakable. He turned back once. You'll regret this. I didn't answer. He was no longer worth words. Celine collapsed into her seat, tears finally breaking past the dam. Her shoulders trembled. No one moved to comfort her. When Reed was gone, the silence left behind felt like the eye of a storm. Everyone in the room had witnessed something unforgettable, not just betrayal, but consequences, raw, undeniable, public. Celine sat frozen, her mascara streaking down her face, lips trembling. She looked like someone who had just realized the life she'd been clinging to was already gone. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "I don't even know who I am anymore." I stood still, watching her unravel. "You don't have to fix anything, just live with it, like I had to live with not knowing for months." She shook her head, her hands twitching in her lap. "Do you remember when we first met? You said I was the most honest person you'd ever known." I nodded. "That's what made it hurt the most." She reached out, barely lifting her hand off her knee. "Cale, I stepped back. Don't." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I made a mistake, 1,000 of them, but Reed didn't mean anything. I felt invisible when you were gone." "I was deployed, Celine," I said quietly. "Not dead." The room was nearly empty now. A few officers stayed behind, likely too stunned to leave. Others probably didn't want to walk past her. "I want to make this right," she said. "Tell me what I can do." "There's nothing you can do," I replied. "The person I trusted doesn't exist anymore." She began to cry harder, curling inward, her body shaking. I watched for a moment. Part of me expected to feel relief. Another part waited for satisfaction. But all I felt was exhaustion. Not the kind that sleep fixes, the kind that comes from knowing something you built with your whole heart has burned to the ground. I turned to leave. "Kyle," she called after me, "please, I still love you." I stopped at the door. I didn't look back. "Then you should have acted like it." And with that, I stepped out. Later that night, I sat alone on a bench near the airstrip. The wind tugged gently at my jacket. Jets roared in the distance. Another deployment was coming soon. I didn't know what the future would look like. The base would eventually forget. Celine would move on. Reed would face charges and probably never wear a uniform again. As for me, I had no interest in revenge anymore. This wasn't about making her hurt. It was about ending the lie, and I had. When the sun broke over the horizon, it brought a strange sense of clarity. Not peace, exactly, but closure. Maybe that was enough. I never thought silence could be so deafening. After the final confrontation, after the vows turned into confessions and the guests scattered like startled birds, I stood alone on that marble stage, the echoes of chaos still ringing in my ears. Alina had fled the ceremony in tears. Rowan had discreetly disappeared into the crowd. The officiant had quietly packed up his things. And I just stood there, staring at the scattered petals beneath my feet. I should have felt victorious. Months of planning had culminated in the perfect exposure. The betrayal was out in the open, every lie, every manipulation laid bare. But what I felt wasn't triumph. It was a strange, hollow ache, the kind that comes not from loss, but from finally letting go. The media picked it up within hours. Someone had filmed the entire ceremony, and within a day, the headline, "Dream Wedding Turns into Nightmare Expose," had gone viral. I became a meme. Alina became a cautionary tale. The comments were relentless, some cheering, some cruel, some disturbingly gleeful. I turned off all notifications. I didn't need validation. I just needed distance. Rowan sent me a single text that night. "You did what most people only dream of. Now, live your life." I didn't reply. I appreciated her support, but I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. In the days that followed, I buried myself in work, not as a distraction, but as a reclamation. The company we built together was now solely under my direction. Alina's shares, thanks to a quiet legal clause we'd inserted months ago, were transferred back to me the moment she violated the trust clause in our executive agreement. Her personal and professional betrayals were interlinked, and both had consequences. My team, once divided in their loyalties, slowly began to rebuild around me. We held a town hall. I was honest, but not bitter. I didn't name names. I didn't throw mud. I just told the truth professionally, calmly, and with a steady voice. After the meeting, one of my junior staff approached me and said, "Thanks for reminding us what integrity looks like." I nodded, unable to speak, because that's what I wanted this to be. Not revenge, not spectacle, but a reckoning, quiet, firm, and undeniable. A week passed before I saw Alina again. She showed up at the company's reception one rainy afternoon, hair soaked, makeup barely clinging to her face. The receptionist looked panicked as she buzzed my office, asking if I wanted her removed. I hesitated, then said, "Let her up." When she stepped into my office, it was like seeing a ghost. She looked thinner, older, drained of the arrogant confidence she once wore like armor. "I didn't come to beg," she said softly, voice cracking. "I just needed to see you one last time." I gestured to the chair across from me, though I didn't sit. I stood by the window watching the rain streak down the glass. Alina hesitated, then continued. "I lost everything. You investors pulled out of my new project. My name is poison in the industry. My parents won't even return my calls, and the baby, I lost it." I turned then, meeting her eyes. There was no satisfaction in me, just a deep, solemn weight. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said, "but I also can't save you." She laughed bitterly. "You already did, Cale. You saved me from myself, just not the way I wanted." There was a long pause before she stood up, walked to my desk, and placed a folded piece of paper on it. "This is the only apology I have left. Written, not performed." She didn't wait for a response. She just left. I didn't open the letter that day. I didn't need to. I knew it was real this time, and that was enough. Later that week, Rowan invited me out to a quiet bar on the edge of the city, the kind of place without cameras or questions. She raised a glass as I sat down. "To peace," she said. I clinked mine gently against hers. "To finally breathing again." She smiled, eyes searching mine. "You think you'll ever trust again?" I paused, considering. Maybe, but not because I forget, because I learned. We sat there in silence, letting the past settle like dust. Months went by. The city moved on, but I stayed in the quiet. I stepped back from the spotlight. I let others run the company. I spent mornings walking in the park, letting the sunlight melt away old shadows. Some days I still caught myself wondering, if I had handled it all differently, would the pain have been less? But healing isn't a straight line. It's jagged and cruel and honest. I eventually opened Alina's letter. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. She wrote about her shame, her confusion, how she felt trapped between ambition and affection. She admitted she used Rowan's interest in the business as an excuse to chase something that felt powerful. She confessed she never thought I'd find out because she believed I trusted her too much. That line stayed with me. "I weaponized your trust." There was no request for forgiveness, just a quiet acknowledgement that she never deserved the life we had, and a hope that I would someday build something better with someone who did. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer where I kept all my past regrets, not to forget, but to remember how far I'd come. One afternoon, I visited the foundation we had once discussed starting. It was just a sketch of an idea back then, but now it was real. Scholarships, media education for underprivileged youth, a cause that came from both our hearts before everything turned cold. As I stood in the hallway of the newly built center, looking at the mural of bright faces, a voice called from behind. "You did it," Rowan said, walking up beside me. "No," I replied. "We did." We stood side by side, not as saviors or victims, not even as lovers, just two people who chose to rise instead of collapse. I've stopped asking why things happen, why people betray, why love turns bitter, but I've learned this. Silence speaks truth. Time reveals character. And revenge, the most powerful form isn't public humiliation, it's living well and refusing to become like them. So if you've been betrayed, don't chase closure in their words. You'll find it in your own actions. You are not what they did to you, you are what you do next.